Hi again, I'm Adam and welcome to another Gadabout United video. As you can see, I'm doing another tier builder ranking video off the back of the one I did several months ago, ranking the United managers since records began. And there's a link to the video in the description if you like the sound of that. Anyway, this time around I'm focusing on the wages of the United squad members for the 2021 season just gone, and whether these salaries paid were in fact good value for money for the club. I'm getting my figures from sportrack.com and I'll leave a link in the description as well as post a list in full near the end of the video. Shown on screen are several grades that each player can fall into. Supreme value, so the salary paid for the kind of season the player had was great business by the club. Good value for money, the salary paid for the player reflects positively in their performances over the 2021 season. About right, the player's performances over the season reflect more or less their pay packet. Overpaid, when the player is paid too much for having on the books compared to how he performed over the season. Waste of money, self-explanatory when a player is not justifying the outlay on them at all. And finally, out on loan. Some of the squad members have been out on loan, but it's good to see what their salary is in comparison to the rest of the squad. In this video, I'll explain into which tier each player should go into and why. And then you can let me know in the comments below why you think they should have gone somewhere else, or that I'm right, or whatever you want to say. The players' wages will also be judged on what they are relative to their teammates. Just before I begin, this is not a ratings video. I'm not grading the player performance over the season. It's more about whether United underpaid, overpaid, or got it about right regarding the salaries of their players. If you want to see the video where I grade the players, that's in the last few minutes of the Manchester United season review, which I've also put in the link in the description below. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. Let's start, and no doubt you'll catch on pretty quick. As you can see, the players are in a mixed up order, not shown according to playing position or alphabetical order. That's the software, not me, so I'll just do them in turn as they're presented. First up, we have Eric Bailly. The Ivorian started the season on an 80 grand a week pay packet. That's just over £4.1 million a year. And to be fair, for the uneven performance he's put in, and compared to what his teammates are on, it's not the worst return. But then again, it's not like he did a great deal in a season where he was injured for much of it, and when he did play later on, it looked like an accident waiting to happen in a number of games. So based on that, he's on the border of about right and overpaid, but slips into the overpaid tier for me, so there he goes. Next up, we have Bruno Fernandes, who is on 180 grand a week. That's over 9 million quid a year. Let's not waste time on this one. There are 6 Reds on more, and I can't think of any of them who deserve a higher wage than he gets. With the goals, assists and positive impact in the dressing room, I still think he's underpaid for his contribution, so the Portuguese makes the top tier. Supreme value. And the next Red, Edinson Cavani, seems to be another no-brainer, albeit is on 30 grand more than Bruno, 210 grand a week. That's just shy of £11 million a year. For a 33-year-old who hadn't played since January 2000 and was surplus to requirements at PSG, he was a big risk. However, it was a risk that really paid off, as it wasn't just that he scored 17 goals at almost a goal every other game. It was that he scored important goals. He was a talisman and boosted the dressing room in much the same way as Bruno, working harder than any other player on the team. The supreme value tier for the Uruguayan too. Next up is Diogo Dalot, who, as we know, spent his season on loan at Milan, somehow inexplicably playing us in the Europa League. Anyway, as he didn't contribute directly to the squad, he goes directly to the out on loan category. But for the record, his United salary is just 25 grand a week. That's 1.3 million a year. Now it's David De Gea, and remember, this is just for the player's 2021 season, not his career at United as a whole. With that in mind, this is not going to be pretty, as the Spaniard, as most of you know, is the highest paid player at the club. A massive £375,000 a week. That's £19.5 million a year. In my opinion, Dave has had a mediocre season by his previously very high standards. That's why he's on such a wage in the first place. Especially earlier in the season, he looked disinterested, uncommitted at times, and afraid to get in where the boots are flying to make a crucial save. His drop in form was so much so that he shared his number 1 spot with Dean Henderson last campaign. Therefore, Dave goes into the overpaid grouping, and was lucky not to drop into the waste of money tier purely because his salary is so high, relative to everyone else. Now we come to Fred, who on the face of it seems to be on a reasonable 120 grand a week, or just under £6.25 million a year. However, to be honest, I don't think Fred is a particularly good United player for a midfielder. He doesn't score, he doesn't create, and just breaks up play. He has a reputedly good win ratio for the side when he plays, or the side tends to win more with him in the team, but that's a really specious argument and doesn't take into account any other factors for that being the case. The fact that he's supposed to be playing very well for Brazil at the moment in the Copa America makes this even more frustrating. 120 grand a week doesn't seem so much compared to De Gea's 375 grand, but he's still in the top 10 highest paid players at the club, so for that reason, I'm putting him in the overpaid tier. Lee Grant, United's number 3 goalkeeper, is on the third lowest salary at the club, a mere 30 grand a week, the second lowest if you don't include out on loan Dalot. So for a player who would rarely play but needs to be a squad player just in case, and for his expertise he demonstrated holding up the subs board when called upon, he gets into the about right tier in this list. Just to be clear, he's not getting a half-decent rating because he's a great player. He's not even played, we know that, but his job isn't to play, his job is to be part of the squad, and he gets paid bugger all for it. So he's about right. On to the third of the 4 goalkeepers here, Dean Henderson. Henderson has had the most games he's had in a United jersey this season, possibly for several main reasons. One, he got a new contract for 100 grand a week this time last season, which is a cool £5.2 million a year. He had such a great season with Sheffield United in the previous season's campaign, and look what happened to the Blades without him. Third, rumours of a summer departure for De Gea, so better blood the replacement now. And finally, the loss of form, confidence, interest, take your pick, of the aforementioned David De Gea. However, by the end of the campaign, Henderson's form had fallen off so much, see the home defeat to Liverpool for rock bottom this year, that an average De Gea won his place back. Henderson's wage is about in the middle for United players, so hopefully for this season only, he was overpaid. Next up, Odion Ighalo. I just want to say I love this guy. He took a wage cut to fulfill his dream of playing in a United shirt at Old Trafford, albeit skipping out on the Chinese league, which is way beneath his abilities. But just as he was getting going, COVID happened, and he didn't manage to win his place back, especially with the arrival of Cavani this year. However, this is about the season just gone. Ighalo had few opportunities to shine for his salary, just shy of £101,000 a week, a tad under £5.25 million a year. So it might seem cruel to place Odion Ighalo into the waste of money tier, especially as he left in January. But this is not based on character or solely on whether a player had a good season or not. It's based upon the player's contribution for the wages paid. So sorry Odion, you go into the waste of money tier. Now we have Dan James, who is on a relatively low 45 grand a week. That's a smidge under £2.35 million a year. I think the youngster has had a decent season, better than the last one, that's for sure. I still think he needs to beef up and improve a number of aspects of his game so he isn't just considered a speed merchant. That said, whilst his low wage equals the low bar to make him worth the outlay, I can't say that he's good value for money, but I'm certainly happy to put him into the about right category. So there he goes. Next up, Phil Jones. Waste of money. Done. Okay, just to pad his entry a little bit, he's only on 75 grand, which means he's on the low end, but he seems to be injured a lot despite not playing. He doesn't seem to have any ambition to play football elsewhere and at least try to get a move away, which would alleviate our wage bill. So for those reasons, I can't respect him, and I'll give him anything but a slot in the waste of money tier. It seems cruel on Ighalo to have Phil Jones on the same tier, but that's the nature of the rules, I'm afraid. Another defender next, and it's Victor Lindelof, who has a lot in common with Fred. Scores about the same number of goals a year, is paid about the same, which is 120 grand a week. Like the Brazilian, he seems to be playing better for his country, and in this case Sweden at the Euros, than in the colours of the side that pays salary. The centre-back pairing with Maguire has been a real issue for United all season, but Lindelof looked for most of it like the best of a bad bunch. However, he seemed to really lose his way at the back end of the season when United needed him to play well the most. I don't think he was that bad that he deserves to be in the waste of money tier, but certainly makes the overpaid tier, and that's where he's going. Next is Jesse Lingard, whose season really came alive in the January transfer window when he was loaned out to West Ham. Therefore, his assessment really is in two parts. The first part, he barely got a game and was ineffective when he did make his 3 appearances for United. Therefore, at 75 grand a week, the same as Phil Jones, you could argue he should be in the waste of money tier, or at least overpaid. That said, seemingly contrary to Phil Jones's attitude, he did want to get back into his best form and motivated himself to get a loan move, and then did United and the boss a ton of favours by being superb in East London, which makes selling him on a far more valuable commodity. So therefore, he goes into the out on loan section. The captain, Harry Maguire, is the next to be assessed. Maguire is on £96 short of 190 grand a week. Which is weird. and that's £9.875 million a year, making him the 6th highest paid player at the club, just above Bruno. Slabhead got a lot of grief at the beginning of the season, but really showed his worth when he was ruled out for the remainder of it after an innocuous incident against Villa. His absence really exposed a lack of leadership and organisation in those remaining games, and really showed up Lindelof for the mediocre performances he put in, as the Swede couldn't step up, and losing the skipper may have cost us much needed silverware. Whilst I don't think it was his best season for United, and he is one of the highest paid players at the club, I think without someone to equal or better him to help out last term, he served the club well, so I've got to put him into the good value for money tier. Reaching halfway, we have Anthony Martial, whose cool £250,000 a month, that's £13 million a year, makes him the 3rd highest paid player at the club. I doubt many would disagree with the statement that the Frenchman has had his most disappointing season at United since he joined, which is strange as he was so good in the 19-20 campaign. Whilst Tony M did help himself to several goals earlier in the season, it took him till the 3-2 win at Sheffield United on the 17th of December for his first league goal, which is crazy for a player of his quality. And for this video, his salary. It seems to be a mental or confidence issue because even after scoring a terrific strike in the 9-0 versus Southampton in the second half of the season, he responded by looking like he'd been told his pet dog had been run over by his nan. An injury which kept him out of the rest of the season with still a good number of games to go may not be his fault, but will not help him with any sort of leeway for this decision. So with regret, for a jaded Tony M, well below par but on more money than Cavani or Bruno, whose contribution was irreplaceable, the Frenchman has to go into the waste of money category. So on to Mason. At just 19, Mason Greenwood is on a very nice 75 grand a week. The same as Phil Jones. He had a good start to the season, but then went right off after the first England international, perhaps because of the COVID England incident with Phil Foden, or maybe something unrelated, I don't know. Anyway, it seemed to be more mind over matter which stunted his performances in my opinion. He played pretty well in the latter half once he got going, and we started to see the form that he'd shown last season. However, as it was a very uneven season for the youngster, and he's on 75 grand, I can't say he's been value for money, but I think he's been about right. I'm sure he'll justify his wage far more next term. Now, Juan Mata is going to get me a lot of criticism. Regardless, I'm a big Mata fan ever since Juan Field. He's not only a class player and consummate professional, I think he's had a very positive effect on the dressing room for his time at the club. However, Mata is the 8th highest paid player at the club, raking in 160 grand a week or 8.32 million a year. Look, like a lot of these players, they are paid what the club thought they deserved they were worth when they signed, and maybe when he signed his lost contract few would complain. However, whatever affection I have for him, the Spaniard has had very much a bit part role in the squad, and that is a lot of money for someone who is not in a first team regular. So unfortunately I have to put one of my favourite Reds into the overpaid tier. Sorry Juan. Next up, Nemanja Matic, whose 120 grand a week is the same as Fred and Victor Lindelof if you'll remember. Matic is very much another squad player but rarely makes a difference when he plays. In my opinion, he's just there to come on and replace tired legs, not to give the side any different option or any sort of boost. He rarely puts in a 7 or 8 out of 10 plus performance. So I'm torn between overpaid and a waste of money tier for the Serb. As I put Fred and Lindelof both on the same wage in the overpaid tier, I can't possibly put Matic on that level. So Nemanja, into the waste of money tier you go. If you didn't know, I'm in no doubt you'll be shocked to see that the next one up is the lowest paid member of the squad, Scott McTominay. That's right, McSauce is on a relatively meagre 20 grand a week, a tad over $1 million a year, which is incredible when you consider the others. Now I think Scott has great potential but is certainly not the finished article right now. But when you compare him to Fred, who's on 6 times his salary, McTominay is so much more deserving. The Scotsman gets his share of goals, gets more involved in the game, makes fewer mistakes and has more passion for the badge. He was the United man of the match in Gdansk. I don't think many people would disagree with that. So I think at that wage, relatively speaking, Scott McTominay is in the supreme value tier. Again, this is not because I think he's the best player in the club, because he's not. It's because of what he gives to the team for the money he's paid. That's the level he deserves. Now we have Andreas Pereira, who is on 50% more than McTominay, at 30 grand a week, the same as Lee Grant. However, Pereira was out on loan at Lazio all season, so he goes into the out on loan tier, as you can't judge his contribution to United in the recent campaign. Someone whose contribution you can measure is the second highest paid player at Old Trafford, Paul Pogba. The Frenchman takes home £290,000 a week, that's over £15 million a year. I think Pogba has had one of his best seasons in a United shirt, Scored some cracking goals, some of my favourites, West Ham, Crystal Palace, really great efforts. Also, he seems to be more invested in the squad and the club, despite the best efforts of his agent to do his usual destabilising, Paul needs to move to realise his full potential BS soundbites. That said, he still went missing in the big games, including the Europa League final. Okay, he was there for the AC Milan away game and he really took us to the next level. But there's still so much more that we don't see, that he does with gusto for France. So seeing as he is paid a lot, but has done fairly well, I'll drag and drop Paul into the about right tier. Another very well paid player is Marcus Rashford, whose £200,000 a week or £10.4 million a year makes him the fourth highest earner at Old Trafford. In my opinion, I think Rash has had far better seasons than the one he's just had. I think he started well enough and scored his share of goals for the season, but I also think that he papers over some rather mediocre, ineffectual performances when he's managed to score a late or inconsequential goal. This has meant he looks maybe a bit better on paper than he's been in reality over the 90 minutes. It's been well reported that he's been carrying a knock, but regardless, whilst that's not his fault, it's his performances that he's being judged on. For the fourth highest paid player, I'd expect a far bigger return, especially as he's been in the first team for about 5 years now. Therefore, I wouldn't go as far as saying he's being overpaid, or on the other hand being value for money. So about right is about right. Now the final keeper of the lot is the unfortunate Sergio Romero. Despite wanting to leave the club for about a year as he understood that he wasn't going to get much first-team football and being Argentina's #1 during a Copa America year, we decided to almost sadistically keep him on the books anyway at 70 grand a week or 3.64 million a year. The rating he's going to get has no reflection on him but more on the personal persons who mercilessly decided to keep him on whilst he was clearly surplus to requirements, costing the club over £3.5 million. So it's with respect that I drag and drop Romero into the waste of money category, even though it wasn't his fault at all. Luke Shaw was amongst the players of the season in arguably what was his best campaign for United. At 150 grand a week or £7.8 million a year, Shaw was still in the top 10 best paid Reds. However, he's earned every penny for that and gets a supreme value tier rating as a result. I doubt many of you would disagree with that. However, Alex Tellers is on a smidge over £93,000 a week or £4.84 million a year, so he's bang in the mid-range of paid players. However, he was brought in to really challenge the just mentioned Luke Shaw for that left-back berth, but did little to convince he would do it. Over the season he made infrequent appearances, guest cameos and the occasional late sub, and didn't seem to contribute much to the attacking side of the team, despite that being stated as one of his main attributes when bought. So when you consider all of that, I have to drop Alex Tellers into the overpaid tier. Young Axel Tuanzebe is on 50 grand a week, 2.5 times the amount paid to McTominay. Despite earning 2.6 million a year, there hasn't been a lot of on-field progress for Tuanzebe over the last 12 months, and whilst the occasional appearances early in the season were encouraging, when there was a centre-back crisis with the aforementioned Maguire injury late in the season, he didn't seize his chance and grab that second centre-back spot when Bailly and Lindelof were flailing. Therefore, despite being on a relatively low wage, I'm not able to bring myself to give him the benefit of the doubt and slot him into the about right tier. So instead, unfortunately, he goes to one below that with the 7 other overpaid players so far. Donny van de Beek, what can you say? The Ajax Academy graduate looked like he had a lot of potential at the beginning of the season and would probably justify his 120 grand a week, the same as Fred, Lindelof and Matic. But for some reason Ole chose to give him few starts and consistently 5 minutes or less of normal time, really taking the mick, despite the Dutchman looking sharp early on in the season. Nearing the end of the campaign, when Donny did get more playing time, he wasn't match fit and bereft of confidence, it being dashed in the previous 7 or 8 months. Therefore, this was a season which was a waste of time for him, a waste of money for us, and so unfortunately, with regret, that's where he goes, waste of money. Aaron Wan-Bissaka is the penultimate player on our list and costs the United coffers 90 grand a week. Whilst I think the Spider has more to come, I thought he had a decent season, albeit not in the same category as Shaw going forward. However, for a player on £4.68 million a year, when you think that Tony M is on almost 3 times that, I think we're getting good value for money on the outlay. So that's where Aaron Wan-Bissaka goes. Last, we have another favourite of mine, Brandon Williams, a player who doesn't shirk and wears the shirt with pride. That said, Williams didn't have as many opportunities in the season just gone as he got in the 1920 campaign. With a young defender on 65 grand a week, which is more than Dan James and even Axel Tuanzebe, What he's done on the pitch can't really equate to him being in the about right or better, so despite me having a lot of time for him, I can only place Brandon Williams in the overpaid tier. I'll give you some seconds to take that in and think how you would have done it differently, which you can then tell me in the comments below, whilst I'll tell you about some noticeable omissions of those who didn't make the list. Unfortunately, as I didn't have any financial information on Amad Diallo or Anthony Elanga, they aren't included, as are other youngsters who seldom played, or were loaned out like Ghana or Hannibal. Anyway, here's the salary list as promised at the beginning of the video. Who was good value for money or not, and who did I put in the wrong tier? Let me know in the comments below, and please help the channel grow by pressing like, share and subscribe. As always, thank you for your support.